The date was October 1st, 1940. The place was Stratford, Connecticut. Test pilot Lyman Bullard sat in the cockpit of an aircraft that looked fundamentally strange, unlike anything most people had ever seen take to the sky. The wings drooped sharply from the fuselage before angling back upward in a configuration that seemed to mock every rule of elegant aircraft design. Everything about it screamed wrong. The Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics had laid down their challenge with crystal clarity. "Build us the fastest fighter in the world," they demanded, "but make it safe enough to land on a carrier deck." Engineer Rex Bisol had made his choice. He was going for speed, and speed alone. His gamble was everything. He staked the entire project on the most powerful engine available, a monster producing 2,000 horsepower, and tackled the impossible propeller clearance problem with a wing design so unconventional that veteran pilots simply shook their heads in disbelief when they saw the drawings. Now suspended at 20,000 feet, Bullard eased back on the stick and glanced at his airspeed indicator. The needle held steady at 405 miles per hour, the fastest single-engine fighter on the entire Earth. Yet 2 years down the road, Navy test pilots would declare this same machine far too dangerous for carrier operations, too difficult to fly, too deadly to its own pilots. The official verdict would be unsuitable for intended purpose. But the Marines had a different perspective. They would accept those rejected bent wing fighters and put them to work anyway. And soon enough, Japanese soldiers would learn to fear them, giving them an entirely different kind of name. What unfolds when the wrong solution becomes the only one that actually works? We need to go back further to February 1st, 1938. That's when the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics issued Request for Proposal 162F, with requirements that sounded more like a dare than a blueprint. They wanted a single-seat carrier fighter, maximum speed obtainable, minimum stall speed at 70 miles per hour, a range of 1,000 miles, 4 guns minimum. Every aircraft manufacturer scattered across America understood what lay beneath those formal words. Troubling reports had been arriving from China describing Japanese aircraft climbing to 20,000 feet with remarkable ease. The Navy needed something faster, something that could reach altitude and still have enough fuel in its tanks for the real fight. They were asking the impossible, essentially. A fighter that could dominate the sky, but also land gently on a pitching carrier deck tossing in the open ocean. Rex Bisol, sitting at his desk in Chancefort Aircraft's facility in East Hartford, Connecticut, read through the requirements twice. At 44 years old, the company's chief engineer tackled problems through ruthless optimization rather than incremental tinkering. While competitors across the industry hedged their bets with proven engines, Bisol made a decision that bordered on reckless. He gambled everything on Pratt & Whitney's experimental XR2800, which people called the Double Wasp. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, 2,000 horsepower at takeoff. Nobody had ever mounted an engine this powerful on a fighter aircraft before. Bisol assembled his core team in his office. Aerodynamicist Paul Baker, structures chief Ernest Mayu, weights expert George Derricott. They began running numbers and immediately smashed into the problem that would define everything that followed. That massive R2800 engine needed a Hamilton standard propeller, measuring 13 feet 4 inches in diameter, to absorb all that power without losing efficiency. Standard landing gear tall enough to clear such a massive propeller, over 9 feet. On a carrier deck, such spindly struts would snap like toothpicks the moment they hit hard. Hours ticked by as the meeting dragged on. Sketches accumulated across Bisol's desk in growing piles. Every potential solution spawned new complications that created additional problems. Retract the gear rearward? There was no room with the folding wings required for carrier storage. Use a shorter propeller? That would waste the engine's power and defeat the entire purpose. Switch to a smaller engine? That simply put them back where they started, building another conventional fighter that couldn't match what the Japanese were producing. Bisol stopped drawing mid-sketch. His pencil hovered above the landing gear attachment point as he stared at the side view profile spread before him. What if they simply bent it? He said quietly. Right here they could drop the wing down, then bring it back up to meet the fuselage at 90 degrees. His pencil tapped the paper. The room fell silent. Then Baker started calculating angles of incidence, his pencil scratching across fresh paper. The others leaned in, checking the mathematics, considering the structural loads. The inverted gull wing actually solved the ground clearance problem by dropping the landing gear attachment point lower while keeping the wing roots elevated. It also created a perfect 90-degree wing root junction that minimized drag. The perpendicular meeting of wing and fuselage eliminated the need for complex fairings. Landing gear could be 5 feet shorter and proportionally stronger. The numbers worked. Remarkably, they actually worked. Months of design work followed. The cockpit shifted 11 feet back from the nose to accommodate a fuel tank. The fuselage stretched to 18 feet, stubby compared to the wingspan. Those bent wings created a silhouette unlike anything in American naval aviation. It looked wrong, absolutely wrong, but the calculations said it would fly. May 29, 1940. Test pilot Lyman Bullard climbed into the F4U-1 for the first time. The massive propeller dominated his forward view. Those inverted gull wings angled down and away from the fuselage in a configuration that violated every instinct about what proper aircraft design should look like. When Bullard ignited the double wasp, 2,000 horses roared to life with a sound no single-engine fighter had ever produced. The first flight lasted 30 minutes. Flutter in the elevator tabs forced an early landing, a problem the engineers would correct, but the speed, even throttled back, exceeded every expectation. September brought additional test flights with improvements incorporated. October 1st arrived with perfect weather. Bullard took off from Stratford and pointed the Corsair, the name borrowed from Vought's 1920s biplanes, toward Hartford at full throttle. The double wasp screamed. The bent wings sliced through air at speeds American fighters had never achieved. 405 miles per hour, the fastest single-engine fighter in America and the world. June 30, 1941. The Navy ordered 584 production aircraft. Everything appeared perfect. Bysol's radical solution had worked. The bent wing cleared the propeller. The speed exceeded requirements. The gamble had paid off. July 31, 1942. USS Sangamon in Chesapeake Bay. Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter approached for his first carrier landing in the new F4U-1 production model. The cockpit sat 11 feet back. That fuel tank placement put him far behind the nose. Porter couldn't see the landing signal officer during his approach. The long nose blocked everything straight ahead, forcing him to fly a curving approach just to keep the carrier deck in peripheral vision. Touchdown. The landing gear compressed, bottomed out, then rebounded like giant pogo sticks. The Corsair bounded 15 feet back into the air, sailed over 3 arresting wires, slammed down again. The tailhook skipped across the deck. Porter's knuckles turned white on the stick as he added power for another attempt. 4 landings, 4 near disasters. Porter called it quits, certain the next attempt would kill him. His report used clinical language to describe an unforgiving aircraft, visibility inadequate for carrier operations, landing gear bounce, unacceptable torque effect during wave-off, vicious and unpredictable, not suitable for carrier operations. September brought additional trials on USS Core and USS Charger. Same problems, different pilots, identical conclusions. Pilots started calling it the Ensign Eliminator for its tendency to kill inexperienced aviators during training. Others used the term bent-wing Widowmaker. The statistics supported the nicknames. Training accidents mounted as more squadrons transitioned to the type. December 1942. The Navy made its decision. They would standardize on the new Grumman F6F Hellcat, slower than the Corsair by 50 miles per hour, but docile and easy to land. The Corsair, with its bizarre inverted gull wings and vicious handling characteristics, went to the Marines for land-based operations only, where bad landings meant running off a runway instead of plunging into the ocean. Rex Bysol's revolutionary design, the fastest fighter in the world, was officially too dangerous for its intended purpose. February 12, 1943. A dozen F4U-1 Corsairs touched down at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. VMF 124 took delivery of the Navy's rejected fighter. The Marines didn't care about carrier operations. They needed fighters that could escort bombers 400 miles to Bougainville and still have fuel for combat. The Corsair had range, it had speed. It had 650 caliber Browning machine guns, 3 per wing, with 400 rounds per gun, 400 rounds total. More firepower than any fighter in the theater. Captain Joe Foss walked the flight line that afternoon, studying the bent wing up close for the first time. "Well," he said to his maintenance chief, "it's ugly, but it's fast." The next morning, February 13th, VMF 124 flew the longest escort mission in the Solomons campaign. 12 Corsairs escorted B-24 Liberators to Bougainville. Range 560 miles round trip. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat couldn't make it. The old Wildcat couldn't even dream of trying. But the Corsair, with 237 gallons in its belly tank and internal fuel, made the run with reserves to spare. February 14th, first air combat for the squadron. A joint strike force of Army Air Forces P-38s, P-40s, and Marine Corsairs rendezvoused over Guadalcanal. Over the target area, they tangled with Mitsubishi A6M-0s. 2 Corsairs went down in the first engagement. One collided with a Zero during a tight-turning fight. The other got caught in a low-speed scissors maneuver. One wing stalled before the other, instant snap roll, no altitude to recover. Pilots returned to Henderson shaken. The mathematics became brutally clear over the next 3 weeks. The Corsair was 50 miles per hour faster than the Zero in level flight. 417 versus 351. Climb rate favored the Corsair at 3,870 feet per minute. Roll rate, excellent. Dive speed, dominant. But turns, the Zero turned inside them every time, completing a full 360-degree circle in 19 seconds versus the Corsair's 24. And at slow speeds, that snap-stall characteristic killed without warning. VMF 124 lost 5 pilots learning the Corsair's limits. But they also shot down 23 Japanese aircraft. The ratio was brutal but undeniable. The Corsair killed more than it died, but only when flown correctly. By April, the surviving pilots figured out the doctrine. Don't dogfight, don't turn with Zeros, use speed and altitude, dive from above at 400+ miles per hour, make one pass with those 650 caliber machine guns. A 3-second burst put 120 half-inch bullets into the target, then zoom climb away using excess speed to regain altitude. The Zero couldn't follow a Corsair in a high-speed climb. Its lighter construction and smaller engine gave it a turning advantage, but cost it in vertical performance. Boom and zoom. Energy fighting. The Corsair was an attacking fighter. It was a slashing predator. June brought factory improvements. The 689th F4U-1 rolled off the production line with changes based on combat feedback. Cockpit raised 7 inches for better visibility. New clear Malcolm hood canopy replacing the earlier framed version. Stiffer landing gear struts to reduce bounce. The Corsair remains a formidable machine, still demanding and still capable of taking the lives of pilots who fly carelessly. But its dangers have lessened considerably compared to earlier models. Come August 1943, word arrives at Santo. Major Gregory Boyington, known to everyone as Pappy despite being only 31 years old, a full decade senior to most of the fighter pilots around him, gets his orders. He's to build VMF 214 from the ground up. Creating something from nothing, 27 pilots arrive to form the core of this new unit. Some are fresh replacements, barely finished with their training back in the States, while others bring hard-won combat experience. These veterans have been pulled from scattered squadrons across the theater, pilots who've already seen what enemy fire looks like. 4 weeks, that's the timeline Boyington has to transform this ragtag collection into a cohesive combat force. But first, they need an identity, a name that means something. Someone suggests calling themselves Boyington's Bastards, even designing a heraldic badge with a bar sinister to represent illegitimacy. It's bold, it's brash, and it absolutely captures the spirit of what they're trying to build. Public Affairs, though, takes one look at the proposal and immediately says no. The compromise that emerges is simpler, harder to argue against. Black Sheep. The name catches on instantly, sticking like it was always meant to be. Boyington brings something concrete to his new command. He's a former flying tiger with 6 confirmed kills from his time in China before Pearl Harbor ever happened. He knows what works and what gets pilots killed. During the very first briefing with his assembled pilots, he establishes a doctrine that becomes non-negotiable. Aggressive offense, he tells them, "We're faster than anything they have in this theater. We use that advantage. Hit hard, hit first, get out. Never turn with a 0, never fight their fight." But there's something else, something unusual that sets him apart from other squadron commanders. He establishes a policy that raises eyebrows. No pilot gets a personal aircraft. Everyone flies whatever Corsair is available that day, whether it's fresh from maintenance or bearing the scars of previous missions. Every pilot gets the temperamental engines and the battle damage. Even Boyington himself takes the worst planes the squadron has, the ones other pilots dread climbing into. The message couldn't be clearer. If I'll fly it, you'll fly it. There's no favoritism, no hiding in a good bird while your men struggle with worse equipment. September 16, 1943, arrives, and VMF 214 flies its first combat mission into actual battle. 12 Black Sheep Corsairs escort Navy SBD Dauntless dive bombers toward Balale Airfield. 2 Zeros make an attack run during the approach. Within 90 seconds, both Japanese fighters are burning spirals descending toward the ocean. No Corsairs lost. The squadron has drawn first blood. A week passes. September 23rd finds the Black Sheep patrolling over the Russell Islands when they spot something that makes their hearts quicken. A formation of 40 Japanese aircraft filling the sky, Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers with no fighter escort. The Corsairs scatter them with high-speed slashing attacks, coming in fast and hard from angles the bombers can't defend. 6 Japanese aircraft are confirmed destroyed that day, with 5 more listed as probable kills. 1 Black Sheep pilot does go down, but he manages to bail out and gets picked up by a Navy patrol boat searching the waters below. 4 days later, September 27th, and the squadron is escorting dive bombers again, this time over Bougainville. 8 Zeros intercept the formation. Boyington and his wingman, William Maggie, call sign Wildman, each splash a 0 in the opening pass. The Japanese pilots decide discretion makes sense here. They break off rather than continue the engagement. They've seen what speed and firepower can do. The doctrine Boyington preaches is working exactly as designed. By October, Boyington adds a new dimension to the squadron's operations. Psychological warfare. He knows the Japanese monitor Allied radio frequencies, so he begins taunting them in plain English during missions. "Come on up and fight," he broadcasts to the enemy. When they take the bait and climb to engage, the Black Sheep are positioned and ready at 20,000 feet, diving through formations with the altitude and speed advantage that Japanese pilots simply can't overcome or match. October 17, 1943. The Kahili Raid. 24 Black Sheep Corsairs circle above Kahili Airfield at the southern tip of Bougainville. 60 hostile aircraft are based there, a formidable defense waiting on the ground. Boyington keeps circling, keeps daring them to launch. Finally, 30 Zeros scramble to defend their home base. The fight that follows lasts 45 minutes. When it ends, 20 Japanese aircraft are burning wreckage, and not a single Black Sheep Corsair has been lost. Admiral Halsey sends a personal message. It reads like music to them. It is real music when you say scratch one nip. December 1943 arrives, and Japanese infantry dug into Bougainville positions. Here's something that makes veteran soldiers immediately drop into their foxholes and makes fresh troops freeze solid with terror. A high-pitched whistle, growing louder, not engine noise, but something else entirely. Something that spells imminent death. The Corsair's wing root oil coolers and supercharger intakes are mounted in slots running along the leading edge of those inverted gull wings. When a pilot pushes the aircraft to high speeds, especially in a steep dive exceeding 400 miles per hour, air screaming through those slots creates a distinctive shriek that carries for miles across the island. The Japanese troops have given it a name, Kuchibue wa Fukushi, whistling death. When that sound begins its rise, death follows within seconds. 650 caliber machine guns or 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets or 4,000 pounds of bombs. The whistle is the only warning, and by the time soldiers hear it, there's nowhere left to run. VMF-214 operates from Vela La Vela, positioned far enough forward that Japanese bases often sit behind them geographically. The Black Sheep fly 2 to 3 missions every single day. Escort duty for bomber formations, combat air patrol protecting Allied positions, ground attack runs against supply dumps and installations, fighter sweeps reaching 300 miles north to Rabaul, the strongest Japanese base in the entire region, with over 300 aircraft waiting on dispersed fields. December 23, 1943. Boyington's personal tally reaches 24 confirmed kills. He's tied now with World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker and fellow Marine Joe Foss for the American record. The pressure intensifies from every direction. The press corps is desperate for hero stories to send back home. Command wants propaganda victories to justify continued support. Boyington himself carries the weight of needing to prove his Flying Tiger experience wasn't some lucky fluke. December 27th brings the moment. Kill number 25 belongs to Pappy Boyington alone. The records are broken. Now he stands at the top. The technical comparison between the two aircraft tells the story when the specifications get laid side by side. The 0A6M5 reaches a top speed of 351 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, climbs at 3,100 feet per minute, and turns through a complete 360 in 19 seconds. Its armament consists of two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns, with only 600 rounds total. The Corsair F4U-1A cruises at 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet, climbs faster at 3,870 feet per minute, and needs 24 seconds for a complete turn. Its guns are 650 caliber machine guns with 2,400 rounds available. The Zero turns more tightly, that's clear. But in every other measurement, speed, climb rate, dive capability, firepower, structural strength, the Corsair dominates. And unlike the Zero's severely limited ammunition, the Corsair's gun bays hold enough rounds for sustained combat. A single 3-second burst delivers 120 half-inch bullets downrange. Most targets don't survive that first pass, but sustained combat takes its toll on human beings. Pilots develop tremors, hands shaking from pure adrenaline overload and accumulated exhaustion piling up. Sleep becomes nearly impossible despite physical fatigue that screams for rest. Boyington starts putting tobacco in the corners of his eyes during morning briefings to force himself awake, to stay conscious through the briefing and ready for the day ahead. The squadron flies 84 consecutive days of combat operations without a break, without rest, without relief. January 3, 1944. Boyington's 28th and what will prove to be his final mission, a fighter sweep to Rabaul. 70 aircraft total, mostly Marine Corsairs mixed with Navy Hellcats. They stack themselves between 20,000 and 24,000 feet, waiting for the enemy response. A dozen Zeros climb to engage, outnumbered but committed to defending their base. Boyington maneuvers in front of one Zero and fires a burst. Smoke trails from the enemy engine. Kill number 26 by some accounts, 28 by others, depending on how credit gets allocated. His wingman, Captain George Ashman, sees Boyington's guns hit home, sees the impact. Then both Corsairs vanish into the swirling confusion of turning aircraft and tracer fire crisscrossing the sky. Neither returns to base. VMF-214 launches search missions, low-level sweeps along the coastline for 3 days, strafing runs against Japanese barges that might have picked up survivors, searching the water below for life rafts or debris or any sign of the men. Nothing appears. On January 8th, the Black Sheep fly their last mission as a unit. The squadron disbands, pilots scattered to other units across the Pacific. The final accounting shows 203 Japanese aircraft destroyed or damaged, with 97 confirmed as air-to-air kills. The rest fell to ground attack. 84 days of sustained combat operations produced 9 aces from a single squadron. But Boyington is gone. The legend solidifies immediately, missing, presumed dead, while the Black Sheep themselves become immortal in the telling. The Corsair, though, continues its own evolution. By January 1944, improvements proliferate through the production lines. Better canopy providing improved visibility, raised seat position giving pilots better sight lines, fixed landing gear that doesn't bounce through improper hydraulic pressure, a small metal wedge riveted to the starboard wing, leading edge to prevent asymmetric stall. The aircraft is becoming measurably less lethal to its own pilots. During this same period, while Americans struggle with carrier operations, the British Fleet Air Arm receives Corsairs with clipped wingtips to fit into lower British carrier hangar decks. British pilots develop the curved approach technique. Instead of flying straight at the carrier until the last possible second, they maintain a continuous gentle turn that keeps the deck in sight throughout the entire approach. March 1944 brings vindication for British doctrine. British Corsairs operate successfully from HMS Victorious during strikes against the German battleship Tirpitz in Norwegian fjords. The Fleet Air Arm proves what the US Navy believed impossible. The Corsair can operate from carriers. It simply needs different technique and willingness to adapt existing doctrine. April 1944 arrives. US Navy Squadron VF-17 finally qualifies aboard USS Bunker Hill, with Corsairs using British procedures that the Royal Navy shared. By late 1944, Marine F4U squadrons deploy to Navy fast carriers specifically to counter kamikaze threats. The carrier fighter, rejected as unflyable, finally flies from carriers 2 years late, but proves absolutely devastating when it arrives. The kill ratio that emerges from compiled combat reports shows the Corsair's real impact. By early 1944, Marine and Navy Corsair pilots have been credited with 584 aerial victories against combat losses of 54 Corsairs to enemy action. The ratio comes to 10.8 to 1. Over the next 18 months, that ratio climbs to 11 to 1, one of the highest achieved by any American fighter in the Pacific. The Hellcat achieves 19 to 1, but it flies with more pilots, more aircraft, more opportunities from carriers doing fleet defense. The Corsair's ratio comes from smaller units fighting deeper behind enemy lines with less support, flying different missions in different contexts. Yet when post-war interrogators ask Japanese pilots and engineers which American fighter they feared most, many name the Corsair. The Hellcat was effective. The P-38 Lightning was dangerous. But the Corsair, with that bent wing silhouette, that whistling dive, that speed and overwhelming firepower, was genuinely terrifying to face. By mid-1944, Vort's Dallas plant produces Corsairs at peak rate. Goodyear adds FG-1 production from their facility. Brewster had attempted production under the F3A designation, but their quality control failures were so severe the contract got cancelled entirely. Total production by war's end reaches 12,571 aircraft. The Corsair now flies everywhere across the Pacific. Marine squadrons at Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Across the Pacific, naval aviation was evolving at breakneck speed. Fast carrier task forces launched their squadrons into battle. The British contributed their own fleet air arm from vessels like HMS Victorious, formidable and indomitable, while New Zealand squadrons operated throughout the Solomon Islands. Eventually, even France would receive F4U-7s for their operations in Indochina, adding another nation to the growing list of users. But it was the Mariana Islands and Okinawa campaigns where the Corsair proved it could do everything demanded of it. As both a fighter and ground attack platform, the aircraft became absolutely vital to American success. The F4U-1D variant could carry either 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets or 4,000 pounds of bombs mounted under those distinctive bent wings. Marine pilots flying from hastily captured airfields used Corsairs to provide close air support where it mattered most. They kept Japanese counterattacks from overwhelming American positions on the ground. Infantry soldiers huddled in foxholes watched Corsairs strike enemy positions just 200 yards away, close enough to feel the shockwaves from the explosions washing over them. The gratitude was genuine and immediate, expressed in nicknames the men called out with relief and wonder. The Sweetheart of the Marianas, the Angel of Okinawa. By July 1944, those names had real meaning. At Saipan, Marine Corsairs destroyed 37 Japanese Type 97 Chai-Ha medium tanks over just 3 days using rockets and bombs. That inverted gull-wing design that had seemed so awkward now revealed its genius. Hard points for ordnance were perfectly positioned. Structural strength was concentrated at the wing root, where loads transferred most efficiently into the fuselage. The bent geometry provided the ground clearance that underwing stores needed without compromising the airframe. What looked like a compromise in 1938 became a tactical advantage in 1944. Then came April 1945 and Okinawa. The kamikazes came in waves like nothing anyone had seen before. April 6th through 7th alone saw 355 kamikaze sorties thrown against the American fleet. The waters around the island turned into a nightmare of suicide attacks and desperate defense. Marine and Navy Corsairs flew constant combat air patrol, positioning themselves between the incoming raids and the vulnerable ships below. Speed became everything. When pilots got a radar vector to an incoming raid, they climbed to intercept altitude and dived through enemy formations at over 400 miles per hour. The kamikazes couldn't scatter fast enough. The Corsair was simply too quick. During those 2 brutal days, Corsairs shot down 43 confirmed kamikaze aircraft. It wasn't all of them, but it was enough to make the difference between acceptable losses and catastrophic ones. By late 1944, the F4U-4 entered service with even more power. The new Pratt & Whitney engine, equipped with water methanol injection for emergency power, produced 2,450 horsepower in 5-minute bursts. Top speed reached 446 miles per hour at 26,200 feet, faster than anything Japan had in production and faster than most Allied fighters as well. Only the P-51 Mustang, with its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, could match it in level flight performance. As production continued, changes accumulated through different variants. All-metal wings replaced the earlier fabric-covered frames aft of the main spar. Improved supercharging enhanced high-altitude capability. The cockpit layout became more sensible, with instruments arranged in a logical pattern that reduced pilot workload. A fully retractable tailwheel reduced drag during flight. Each improvement made the aircraft more deadly while making it marginally less deadly to its own pilots. The landing gear had a nasty tendency to bounce, a problem solved only after discovering the correct hydraulic strut pressure settings. That simple fix came far too late for early production models, claiming lives during training flights. The snap stall at low speed proved equally troublesome until engineers riveted a small metal wedge to the starboard wing edge. This tiny disruption to airflow prevented one wing from stalling suddenly without warning, letting both wings stall at the same time instead. The visibility issue, always a complaint from pilots, finally got addressed. A raised cockpit and bubble canopy appeared starting with the -1A model. By mid-1945, the Corsair had transformed into something fundamentally different from what it had been. No longer the Widowmaker, no longer the ensign eliminator. It had become a mature weapon system, demanding and unforgiving still, but learnable for pilots willing to study its temperament and respect what it could do. The final combat statistics told the real story. Corsairs destroyed 2,140 Japanese aircraft in air-to-air combat, with losses to enemy aircraft totaling only 189. That produced a kill ratio of 11.33 to 1. Pilots flew 64,051 combat sorties and delivered over 14,000 tons of bombs. Compare this to the P-51 Mustang over Europe, which achieved 4,150 victories against 2,120 losses for a ratio of 1.96 to 1. The F-6F Hellcat in the Pacific recorded 5,063 victories against 270 losses, producing a ratio of 19.1 to 1. The Hellcat's ratio was higher, certainly, but context matters tremendously. Hellcats primarily flew from carriers on combat air patrol missions, intercepting attackers heading toward the fleet under controlled conditions, where altitude and position favored the defenders. Corsair pilots, by contrast, flew deeper, longer-range ground attack heavy missions where anti-aircraft fire was constant, and pilots found themselves over enemy territory with nobody backing them up. The context was completely different, making direct comparisons misleading. Yet when Japanese pilots and engineers faced interrogation after the war and were asked which American fighter frightened them most, many named the Corsair. The Hellcat was effective through sheer numbers and reliability. The P-38 Lightning was dangerous with its twin-engine range, but the Corsair, with that distinctive bent wing silhouette, visible for miles, and that incredible whistling scream during a dive, inspired something deeper. Genuine terror. September 10, 1952. Korea, Marine Captain Jesse Fulmar of VMF 312 was flying an aging F4U-4B Corsair on a ground attack mission near the west coast of North Korea. He spotted a MiG-15 jet fighter approaching, swept wings, modern design, capable of 530 miles per hour in level flight. The MiG dived on Fulmar's formation. He turned hard into the attack. A propeller-driven Corsair and a jet engaged in a dogfight at low altitude. Jets lose energy fast when making tight turns. Fulmar got behind the MiG and fired his 20mm cannons. The MiG disintegrated. It became the first and only confirmed kill of a MiG-15 by a Corsair. A 12-year-old piston engine design had just shot down a jet. It would be the bent-wing fighter's last combat victory. January 31, 1953. The final Corsair, an F4U-7 destined for the French Navy, rolled off the production line at Vort's Dallas plant. Production had run from 1942 through 1953, spanning 11 years. This was the longest production run of any American piston engine fighter. In total, 12,571 Corsairs were built. The design that looked wrong in 1938 had remained relevant all the way into the jet age. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, Allied prisoners of war emerged from camps across the Pacific, many barely recognizable as human. Emaciated, sick, struggling to walk, many had spent years locked away with almost nothing to eat. Among them was Major Gregory Boyington. Contrary to what everyone believed, he hadn't died over Rabaul on January 3, 1944. A Japanese submarine had fished him out of the water after he bailed out, wounded in the shoulder and leg. He'd spent 20 months as a prisoner, enduring interrogation, beatings, and starvation rations. But he'd survived. October 1945 brought him to the White House lawn. President Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor, originally thought to be posthumous. The citation credited Boyington with 28 aerial victories, though debate continues about the exact number depending on how different combat reports get reconciled. Somewhere between 24 and 28. Regardless, he was the top-scoring Marine ace of the entire war. The Black Sheep reunion that week in Washington became legendary. Life magazine photographs captured what might have been the first real war heroes, documenting their drinking and celebration for the public to see. The pilots scattered after that, some staying with the peacetime Marine Corps, others leaving for civilian life. But the legend persisted in newspaper archives and bar stories told by those who'd been there. In the years immediately following the war, a quieter re-examination occurred within naval aviation circles. The Corsair's early history remained deeply embarrassing to military institutional memory. Failed carrier trials in 1942. Training deaths that created the Ensign Eliminator reputation, 2 full years spent operating only from land-based airfields before finally being deployed from carriers using techniques the British had to teach the Americans. The Hellcat got the glory in official histories with 5,000-plus kills and a 19-to-1 ratio. It flew from carriers from the very first day with no complications. The Mustang dominated headlines about the European air war. The Corsair remained an asterisk, a complicated story that didn't fit neat narratives. It was a plane with a strange wing that needed Marines to prove it worked. In peacetime, the bent wing looked far stranger than it had in combat. Other successful designs had used conventional wings. The Hellcats were straight, the Mustangs were straight. The Corsair's solution looked exactly like what it was. A compromise, a radical fix for an intractable problem. Weird. By 1957, the last operational Corsairs left U.S. military service. Jets dominated the skies, propeller-driven fighters became historical artifacts. For a time, the Corsair faded from public memory. Just another World War II aircraft that had done its job and then retired. But decades later, popular culture changed that story completely. From 1976 through 1978, the television series Black Sheep Squadron aired on NBC. Robert Conrad played Boyington as a hard-drinking, brawling Marine who defied authority and won his battles. It was dramatized, fictionalized, and historically loose by any serious measure. But it introduced millions of Americans who weren't alive during the war to the bent-wing fighter and the men who flew it. The Corsair became an icon. Children across the country watched episodes and learned the name. Airshow circuits discovered that surviving Corsairs drew enormous crowds. By the 2020s, 45 privately owned examples remained airworthy in the United States. That distinctive whistle from the wing root intakes at high speed, the sound Japanese soldiers had called whistling death, became what airshow announcers called the sound of freedom. Crowds cheered during low passes. Children pointed at the bent wings. The weird compromise that had made engineers uncomfortable in 1938 became the most recognizable feature. The signature that made the Corsair instantly identifiable from miles away. Modern aerospace historians now regard Rex Beissel's solution with professional respect, born from genuine technical understanding. The inverted gull wing had been considered bizarre when he sketched it during that problem-solving session in 1938. But it solved multiple problems simultaneously. Ground clearance for the 13-foot 4-inch propeller, without requiring landing gear so long, it would have been structurally weak. An optimal wing fuselage junction at 90 degrees for minimum drag where the surfaces met. Structural efficiency, since the wing root carried maximum loads right where it was strongest, at the fuselage attachment point. Weapons hard points positioned perfectly for bombs and rockets with proper ground clearance. Later aircraft designs would employ similar concepts for entirely different reasons. The F4U Corsair had pioneered solutions that became part of the standard engineering toolkit. But the real vindication came from the pilots themselves. Surviving Corsair pilots spoke consistently across the decades and thousands of flight hours. Marines who flew at Guadalcanal, Navy aviators from Okinawa, British Fleet Air Arm pilots from operations in Norwegian waters, all expressed the same themes. It tried to kill me during training, but it saved my life in combat. The Zero could turn inside us, but we were faster and we decided when we wanted to fight. I never felt vulnerable in a Corsair. That big engine up front felt like armor. When you heard that whistle in a dive, you knew you had them. The Corsair demanded skill. It killed the careless and the unlucky. But for pilots who mastered its characteristics, who understood its strengths and respected its limitations, the bent-wing fighter was incomparable. One pilot called it the finest mount in the entire Pacific. The numbers supported that testimony. 2,140 aerial victories, an 11-to-1 kill ratio, 189 combat losses to enemy aircraft, 12,971 produced. Service spanning from 1942 through 1953 in American use and far longer with other nations. It was the first American fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour when Lyman Bullard hit 405 on October 1, 1940. It had the longest production run of any American piston engine fighter. 23 Marine aces scored 5 or more victories flying Corsairs. 24 Navy aces did the same. Today, those 45 airworthy Corsairs still fly at airshows and commemorative events. Museums worldwide display them. The Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, the Royal Air Force Museum in Britain, the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. When you see one sitting static on display or roaring past at an airshow, the bent wing no longer looks wrong. It looks right. Distinctive, purposeful, the visual embodiment of form following function, of solving the problem that demands solving, regardless of what beauty might suggest. Rex Beissel didn't design a beautiful aircraft in 1938. He designed a functional one that prioritized speed above all other considerations. He solved the propeller clearance problem with the only solution that actually worked within the constraints he faced. And in doing so, he created something that transcended its original purpose. The Navy rejected the Corsair in 1942 because it was too difficult, too dangerous, too strange. They were absolutely right. It was all those things. But the Marines took it anyway and proved that difficulty can be overcome, danger can be managed, Strange can be devastatingly effective. The bent-wing fighter that couldn't land on carriers became the most feared aircraft in the entire Pacific. The compromise that cleared a propeller became the symbol of American aerial dominance. Sometimes the solution that looks the most wrong is actually the only one that works. Sometimes the weird design is the perfect design.